Thank you all, and thank you all for joining us in this session at the Doha conference, and welcome to our prestigious panel, especially His Excellency, the Foreign Minister from Somalia. We're very grateful that you've joined us. Next to the Foreign Minister is the SRSG James Swan for Somalia. And right at the end is my colleague, Claudia Gazzini, who is responsible for our Libya work. And we've left the last seat, hopefully, that the Africa Union Commission spokesperson, Dr. Eba Kalondo, will be able to join us. Welcome to all of you participants for joining us in this session. It's a very topical preoccupation that we have, especially in the Horn of Africa, North Africa, and particularly the Sahel, that we're here this morning to talk about how we unwind and deal with proxy wars in two critical regions of the continent. Both sites are sites of great power competition. Our concern, particularly in Libya, is how to deal with averting a protracted conflict in that region that has spilled into the Sahel and into parts of North Africa. In the Horn of Africa, the location also of momentous change and transition, as we're speaking, is occurring in a region that historically has been prone to proxy conflicts, a region where we've seen internal conflicts of one country spill over into another country, where we've seen the domino effect of internal conflicts spilling into the region. And so our preoccupation today is how we unwind those propensity to see internal conflicts spill over, how we address what we see as great power competition both in the region and in the wider international community, and how we build sort of a delicate balance of power in terms of international engagement and cooperation to resolve a number of these neighboring disputes, internal disputes, and also how we align the various interests of both international, regional, and local actors in the region as well. So I've told our panelists that I'm going to pose a question to all of them, to give them all 3 minutes or so to respond to a particular question regarding their region, and then we'll have some follow-up questions and we'll open it up to the participants. My name is Comfort Aero from the International Crisis Group, and I'm the moderator of this session. Minister, let me start with you, and it will be really helpful if we, before we dive deeper into questions around Somalia, that we begin with some sort of broader picture issue of where we are today in the Horn of Africa. I said it's both a region that has been prone historically to proxy wars, to regional conflicts spilling over into other countries, but it's also a region today that is on the verge of some momentous and significant changes. But proxy wars have long been waged, and in recent years by rebel groups, backed by individual countries, whether in the region or beyond. And with the Horn of Africa particularly witnessing some significant change and transformation, do you see the prospects for more regional cooperation, more conflict resolution, or do you sense a continuation of spillover of crisis from one country to another?
Thank you very much, Comfort. I'm honored to be here at the Doha Forum and on the same panel with these important people like the SRC to Somalia, my friend James Swan, and others. You used the right words for my region. Indeed, Horn of Africa is going through momentous transformation and change. I like to report that these momentous changes are for the good. I'm very optimistic of the prospects of our region, thanks to dynamic new leadership for the last few years. The example of the Prime Minister of Ethiopia, Dr. Abiy Ahmed, who just won the Nobel Peace Prize. The president of my own, President Mohamed Abdullahi Farmajo. You know the new Prime Minister in Sudan that's transforming, Dr. Hamdouk, and other leaders are all committed to leaving behind many years of conflict and undermining each other and instability, and are now coming together for economic integration and political cooperation. So IGAD is compared to its past, recent past, and compared to other regions, are overcoming its past history of conflict. And if countries cooperate, come together, then that also presents an opportunity to also shield or serve away proxy wars and external intervention. So ours is one that's towards a good future of cooperation and integration, and minimizing conflict and limiting, although the danger is always present, of proxy wars and external intervention.
Well, let me have a follow-up question with you specifically on that, and delve a little bit into Somalia and the history of external interests, both within the region but also further into the region. One of the key challenges for Somalia today is a sort of tension between the Somalia federal government and regional states. How are you coping with that in the context of current shift in regional and wider international interest in the Horn of Africa? Specifically, does the current shift in international geopolitics provide an opportunity or a challenge to achieving unity in Somalia today?
Yeah, so I think the tension is sometimes exaggerated. Old narrative persists about Somalia. Of course, Somalia is coming out of protracted, statelessness and civil war and all of that. And politics is always, as Chantal Mouffe would have it, agonistic pluralism. So even in normal situations, politics tends to create tensions. But Somalia, which is now reconstituting its state, would have some challenges, internal and otherwise. But I can assure you that, as has been the trend, Somalis will find a way of, settling whatever disagreements, political or otherwise. That would also help Somali in the process of peace, of consensus building, will also prevent others taking advantage, as has been in the past, to intervene and to play one group against the other. So there too, on that front, I'm hopeful for the prospect.
I'll come back to you, and I know our participants would like to ask you more questions on that. But to SRSG, Swan, you've been now SRSG in Somalia for over a year now, or coming up to a year, maybe more, I can't remember, but
it's just 6 months.
Just
Perhaps
6 months.
Sometimes it seems like a year.
Seems like longer, because I know that we've interacted before. And I wanted to follow up with what the minister was saying and ask you from your position as a UN sort of ambassador for Somalia. we've often seen disagreements among international actors on the pathway to finding peace and stability, both in the region and in the region that you're familiar with as well, in the Great Lakes, but specifically in the region. And Somalia has always been sort of a center of disagreement, and finding cooperation has always been a challenge. International actors always do not act as a coherent whole when it comes to Somalia. And it's, in a sense, it allows various actors to use and abuse their relationships with international partners. How can the UN, how have you, in your last 6 months, been able to try and foster cooperation to deal with the various competing interests, both within Somalia and the region and the wider international region? I say this especially with an eye on what is going to occur in Somalia next year, the elections in Somalia. And also, I say this because of the shifting sands that we're seeing in the region as well. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, Comfort. And first, let me thank our Qatari hosts and say that I'm honored to be on this panel, particularly with my dear friend, Minister Awad. And I see many other colleagues and government officials from Somalia in the audience as well. Let me say, first of all, that while we often look at international involvement in Somalia as a negative, there are, of course, many examples where this intervention and involvement has been highly positive. To cite one current example, of course, is the engagement of the African Union mission in Somalia. In the opening comments at the plenary session, there was discussion about engagement with the African Union, and I think, in fact, AMISOM is a signal example of cooperation between the rest of the world and the African Union in trying to address a security situation that's important for all of us. The African Union mission, now about 20,000 troops, is actively supported by UN-assessed contributions, as well as by direct contributions from a number of partner entities. I think it does represent a genuine global partnership to try to address security concerns in Somalia while supporting a Somali lead in that sector. In terms of trying to foster greater international cooperation and coherence around Somalia, this is an important point, because in the past where we've seen good progress, often it has been because the international partners are substantially aligned in their thinking and aligned behind a Somali and regional strategy for how to move forward. For example, during the period roughly 2011 through 2013, we saw a Somali roadmap to end the transition period and choose a new government. We saw strong regional support for that, particularly from the Intergovernmental Authority on Development, and we saw strong international support driven through a number of mechanisms, but including the London conference process during that period. Today, I think if we look at efforts to promote international cohesion on Somalia, we can see it at two levels. One, at a high level, more global approach. There is, in fact, a high degree of coherence in the UN Security Council among all 15 members. Again, in the plenary session, there was much discussion about the role of the Security Council, but I think we see today both the permanent members, the three African Union country representatives, those from the Middle East, all rallying behind a common set of messages about Somalia. Similarly, in October, we held the Somalia Partnership Forum, at which more than 40 bilateral partners and multilateral partners came together and agreed with the government on 4 areas of focus for 2020. And I think this really does speak to a high degree of cohesion around what we're trying to do. And briefly, that Somalia Partnership Forum stressed the need for an emphasis on inclusive politics, particularly moving to national universal suffrage elections in 2020. but also to a constitutional review process to be completed by the middle of 2020. In addition to these inclusive politics goals, there was a set of goals around the security sector, particularly moving forward to enhance Somali security capacity and undertake a further well-coordinated operations with international partner support against al-Shabaab. Some of these began during the course of 2019, but we want to see them reinforced and enhanced in 2020. So in addition to the inclusive politics and the security and justice agenda, an emphasis on economic reforms, particularly achievement of decision point for Somalia as a highly indebted poor country. Somalia is very close to achieving debt relief. If it remains on track, this would be considered in February or March of the coming year, and it's quite a remarkable achievement that both in terms of the technical requirements to achieve debt relief, in essence, erasure of approximately $5 billion in external debt, that Somalia has made remarkable progress over the past year to year and a half in achieving that trajectory. And finally, on the economic development front, Somalia has adopted a new national development plan, and partners agreed at the Somalia Partnership Forum to align their efforts behind that national development plan. So there have been significant efforts to ensure that we have a coherent message internationally around the governance agenda, security agenda, economic reforms, and a national development program.
Well, as far as you, Swan, let me press you specifically on the elections. And Minister, I know you're here, and you of course feel free to respond. But specifically from a UN perspective, Somalia, as you said, is going to elections, and it plans to hold sort of a one person, one vote election next year. From a security standpoint, is that possible? Given the nature of security in the country, what realistically can be done to ensure that election that involves, involves more people and is more representative than the last one that we saw in Somalia? And how can we guarantee that the country will stick to the timetable that it's planned for himself? But the big one is around the nature of the elections and the security, and guaranteeing that it's fully representative of the people as well.
Yes, indeed. This is a current focus of attention in Somalia as the parliament is debating during this period the electoral code that will guide this elections process in 2020. There has been great scrutiny to what the model could entail. An initial draft of the electoral code was presented in the spring, but was subject to further review and consultations by an ad hoc committee. That committee has made recommendations to the Parliament, and Parliament is now debating a new version of this electoral bill. I think, Comfort, the way you characterized it as the ambition being a more representative and more participatory process is likely to be the watchword as this goes forward. Again, there is strong coherence in terms of the Security Council, and the mandate of the mission that I lead is to support one person, one vote election process, and we're very much focused on delivering on that mandate. In terms of the critical questions of security, the earlier version of the electoral code indicated that elections would be held where possible, suggesting that there could be some limitations in terms of the location at which the balloting would take place, subject to considerations of security or other access questions. The government has also established an elections security task force, which has recently begun meeting under the chairmanship of the National Police Commissioner. And that entity is going to be examining in detail what would be the requirements for securing the elections going forward. But for all of the daunting difficulties of organizing such balloting in Somalia, I think it speaks to a broader aspiration on the part of the Somali people to have a greater opportunity to participate directly in decision-making around the future of the country. Again, one of the themes of this forum appears to be that of inclusion, and there's great eagerness to see opportunities for more inclusive political decision-making, and also more inclusive decision-making that affords opportunities for women, for minority groups, and for others who've traditionally been marginalized to have their say as well.
I'm sure our audience will like to ask you both more questions around the elections. And as you rightly said, SRSG, the watchword for 2020, not just for Somalia, but for the region, will be representation and inclusiveness. So I know we'll the lady at the back there, standing up, please.
Thank you very much. Zahra Hassan, chargée d'affaires de l'ambassade de Djibouti. Yes. I will not say I have question, but it's just comments that I would like to say. It's as a Djiboutian lady and my government, we all happy that Somalia, all achievement that she made and is still doing, and sustainable development she's doing for recent years and still continuing. And not Somalia and Djibouti, we have tied very good relations, not because Somalia, she stood by us, by Djibouti during an independent movement, and not because of that we stood by Somalia and we stood each other, and that's coming because of our beliefs from both countries, Djibouti and Somalia. We are brothers and not just neighbors. Also, I just want to say it's good example and hope for not just for Africa but I think it's for all the world and all achievement that she's doing Somalia. And I would like to say congratulations and all the best luck for 2020 election coming on, everything coming on. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. That's excellent. My next question is for the ambassador for Uganda to the UN. Adonia, please.
Thank you for introducing me, so I will not introduce myself.
Good job, I know you.
Quickly, regarding Somalia, and I'm glad to see my two old friends on the panel. On AMISOM, 10 years after, and with all the progress and challenges, what does the exit of AMISOM look like? Is it the next elections? Is it the training of the Somali National Army? I would want to hear more about the exit. And since the topic is proxies, what about proxies from the Gulf in relation to the Somali situation? It's not only the neighbors that meddle in Somalia, it's also proxies from outside.
Off with you to answer Adonia's question about, what does AMISOM mean next year? Does it equal exit and training? And then, Minister, I'll ask you to wrap up with the conclusion as well of your own. Please, Ambassador.
Certainly. First, with regard to any decisions related to the pace and the numbers of AMISOM forces present in Somalia, ultimately these are decisions that are taken through the African Union Peace and Security Council and then by the United Nations Security Council as these operations are UN mandated. There is an active effort to ensure that any decision-making is well-informed by an understanding of conditions on the ground. And so even in the past several weeks, there has been a combined threat assessment in preparation by the federal government of Somalia, the AMISOM contingent, and the United Nations to try to identify what are core threats that should inform thinking about the future of the mission. Obviously, those threats also need to be matched against what are objectives going forward. But there is a systematic effort to do this in a sound and responsible way.
Sorry. If you don't mind, I'm going to ask the Minister to conclude specifically with this question, your views on Gulf proxies and the impact on Somalia, even more so given how the various international interests are impacting on Somalia with these new sets of actors and interest in your country?
So before I say a word to the question posed to me, I should mention that Somalia is grateful to AMISOM and the sacrifices that has been done. We're grateful to them. AMISOM has given a space to Somalia to reconcile itself, to rebuild its state institutions. And we should not see AMISOM, as we talk, when we discuss AMISOM, as the end goal itself. AMISOM is a means to reconstituting the Somali state, to rebuilding or strong institutions for Somalia that could sustain the gains achieved. So we should see AMISOM in that regard. But when we focus AMISOM, then we forget the bigger picture and the gains that have been achieved because of AMISOM's presence and giving space to Somalia. Now the proxies, the situation is not as bad as it is in Somalia as it is in Libya. So the comparison made earlier, I think, is not that correct. We have suffered from interference and proxy wars, but not anymore. And as more consensus building takes place in Somalia, the more or the less the impact of external interference or proxy wars is on Somalia. And I can tell you, I mean, that in Somalia we are confident that because of the developments in our region, IGAD itself is coming, reconciling itself, the integration I was talking about, will, and as Somali institution is mature, and as Somalis themselves come to consensus of our state building efforts, election is legitimate election is constitutional reform, the economic program, all of that, then we will be able to prevent external change. So we're not very much worried or concerned with, even if there are some who would wish to interfere in our affairs, we're confident that we will be able to withstand such interventions.
Minister, thank you very much, and we're all going to be marching with you into next year in that confidence that you talked about. Please join me in thanking the Minister, SRSG Swan and Claudia.